This is NFA Talk, the show that talks about guns and gun rights, keeping you up to date with what's currently going on, from the newest guns, promotions, and events, plus how we're lobbying for your rights.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Nathaniel Milger, social media coordinator for Canada's National Firearms Association. With me tonight is Vice President Blair Hagen and Daniel Fritter of Calibre magazine. How are you guys doing tonight?
Not bad. Real good.
Great. Okay, so before we get into anything, I'm just going to throw this up here. We currently have a promotion going on right now. It's our annual Big Freaking Gun giveaway. The Grey Guardian, it's this beautiful Cadex rifle, loopholed scope. And on top of that, you also get a level 1 precision rifle course at the legendary Rob Furlong's Marksmanship Academy out here in Alberta. It's a really, really great promotion. Really, one of the most phenomenal ones we've put together. And in fact, I've been out there a couple of times to his compound. It's a marksman's dream. It's heaven out there. So definitely consider participating. And on that note, we'll go back to the guys here. First things first, we've been dealing with a lot of things online recently. A lot of the emails I respond to, and for example, the recent arbitrary Tavor mini ban that we just went through, as well as now with C21 coming in, and we are now having estates come to us going, what do we do with these firearms? Sadly, a lot of people are just letting the RCMP come, grab them, whatever. But if you've contacted me, usually I direct you to Blair. Blair is our vice president. He's been around forever, but people are asking me who you are. So who are you, Blair?
Who am I? This is nothing new. Okay, this has always been something NFA has done ever since this organization got going. 40 years ago? Because the laws regarding firearms, especially as it pertains to estates, are so convoluted and complicated that you find yourself in a situation, maybe you're the executor. What do I do? What do I do? You call the RCMP, first mistake, and you're not going to get an answer. They will refer you to a website that is clear as mud. If you contact NFA, you're going to get a real world answer, a real world, real time, plain language answer on what you need to do in regards to firearms and estates. And if you contact Nathaniel, if you call our office in Edmonton, they're going to refer you to me. Okay. And I will advise you on what you need to do in regards to firearms, regardless of classification, non-restricted, restricted, prohibited, May 2020 OIC, handguns, handgun-free stuff. You will get a real-world answer on what to do.
And I can attest to that, because when I first joined the NFA, one of the reasons that I joined the NFA, I'm one of those people that's guilty where I didn't really look into it until I needed it. My grandfather passed and he left me some pistols. And I remember a gentleman from the RCMP or somebody somewhere along the line where I was trying to go through the paperwork. He said, "Listen, son, you're never going to own those guns." And then I contacted Blair and he said, "Listen, son, we're going to get you those guns." And I have them. I've got my grandfather's pistols. For now, they are now listed to be destroyed again because of C21, the pistols he brought back from the Second World War. Family heirlooms, so we're back to square one, but at least they're still in my possession. And I can't thank the NFA and Blair enough for that. So yeah, he's helped me. He'll help you too.
I'm, as you said, I've been around here forever. I've been with NFA for about 30 years. Started off as a field officer, British Columbia vice president. I was appointed national vice president by Dave Tomlinson in 2005. During that federal election, that was a big election. That was the Paul Martin handgun ban election. That was one we had to win, and we did win and change Canada forever in doing so. So I've been vice president. I was president from 2008 to 2010. And since then, I've been vice president and director for BC and Yukon.
And from time to time, president too, right? So
yeah, in and out.
Right on. Okay, so moving on to Daniel. Daniel Fritter. A lot of us know who you are. We're all very familiar with your magazine, but for those of, I hate to say it, but like we go to TACCOM now and we have individuals coming up to us going, who is the NFA? Who is, and then we have to explain who we are to these youngins. So I'm sure there's probably a few people that are gonna be watching here that have no idea. So fill them in.
Well, my name is, as mentioned, Daniel Fritter, just like the donut, and it's the easiest way to spell that last one. And I have been running Calibre magazine, which is a firearms publication, print media publication in Canada for 12 years now. I got involved in gun politics actually during an election as well, and then sort of dug in with both hands during C391, Candace Hepner's, I think it was Candace Hepner's attempt to kill the long gun registry when Harper still had a minority.
Private members bill. Yeah,
private members bill. And it went quite far for a private members bill. And I was petitioning local gun clubs in the Vancouver area, talking to the guys at the trap club I was shooting at like 3 times a week, the Port Coquitlam Gun Club, you name it, trying to get people on board and involved and invested, because I was not a fan of the long gun registry even then. Obviously we were successful eventually, and at the time I was working testing cars and motorcycles actually, which was an awesome job, but it might not surprise people to learn the salaries in that industry right around the recession when all the automakers went bankrupt were not awesome. So I ended up calling out to the company I was working for in Montreal, who laid me off. Ended up spending 6 to 10 months trying to find work, but again, mid-recession, not the easiest thing to do, and decided to start up my own publication, addressing what I saw was a pretty big perceived need to share knowledge amongst Canadian gun owners, both on like a legislative basis, because previously when I'd been working on the long gun registry, like you'd said, even then I was shocked at the amount of both ignorance, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, I mean like true ignorance. People just gun owners didn't understand long gun. Yeah. They would say things like, well, I support it because like I watch CSI, and when they shoot someone and then they pull the bullet out, they can use the long gun registry to find the culprit. It's like, that's not what this is. That's not at all what it is. Straight up to misinformation, where people would say things like this and repeat it. And I read magazines prolifically, always have, and I got really tired of reading Guns and Ammo and having no actual useful information in there, because it's all about concealed carry and hunting with an AR-15 and stuff like that, which even then was not super useful information for a Canadian to have. So thought I'd start up a magazine, and yeah, now it's been 12 years going on 13, and it's getting better, I think, with every issue, and getting more engrossed in the culture and the history and kind of finding its true meaning. So it's been awesome. And then doing more things like YouTube and podcasts have been phenomenal ways to build on that and share some of this knowledge. Because like you said as well, there's a lot of shooters out there that don't know a lot of this stuff, don't know our history. And I think that's owing to the fact there's a lot of people that have come into the hobby in the last 5 years, say, like really since COVID kind of hit. There's been a ton of people that have got new licenses. I'm always shocked at how many people I meet where I go to the gun club, and I just kind of assume, because I'm a younger guy, that most people have been shooting for as long as I have or longer. But then you find out they've had a license for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And they don't know things like Canada used to have a handgun manufacturer called Para that built 1911s in Quebec. They just have no idea about this stuff. So it's really nice to be able to share that with people, especially in a situation like this where, I've been doing a lot of talking about concealed carry and stuff in Canada, thinking about it. And, when I first got into shooting, the ATC3, the protection of life concealed carry permit, or ATC, was not a mystery. It was taught in the course. Everyone knew about it. The form could be downloaded online. Now I find out that, the RCMP have intentionally gone and obscured that. You have to call them, and they will send you the form if they determine that the risk you're facing is sufficient enough for you to even apply. Yeah. So we've got all these new shooters in a regime that has, at least is expressing a vested interest in obscuring a lot of the culture, a lot of the history, a lot of the facets of our hobby from new shooters. So it's nice to have a role trying to correct that.
And that it definitely is an agenda of this present Liberal government since they got elected. Progressively, I mean, they've introduced legislation, Bill C-71. They did the May 2020 OIC, Bill C-21, handgun freeze, all of that stuff. And, being at this as long as I have, I mean, it really throws me back to the early days of this fight. But the fact of the matter is, and I think you pointed it out just there, This is a matter of Canadian culture. Okay. And back in the day, it was just readily apparent, readily available. People who were involved just accepted it as reality. But over the years, Liberal governments and some PC governments tried to sort of weed that out of our culture, our experience, and tried to institute a regime or a narrative that sort of said, well, guns are not really a Canadian thing. And, frankly, at some point in time, it will not be a Canadian thing. And the average Canadian will not have access to that. And that's why I think Calibre magazine is a fantastic method of re-communicating our rights and freedoms and culture to a new generation of Canadians. But we really need to do this because this is a Canadian right and cultural tradition that a lot of people back in the day thought, well, if we don't really, make a lot of noise about this, the government won't come for us. They won't come for our guns. But the fact of the matter was that was the wrong tack to take. They did it anyway, and I think we really need to advance this concept going forward in the future.
I agree, and I think it's weird you say that because I haven't heard. I mean, that argument used to be so prevalent maybe 8-10 years ago that don't talk about it. I remember putting an AR-15 on the cover saying that the government was going to ban them. This is going back like before the 2020 ban, I think in 2018.
Yeah.
And I had pretty good information that it was going to be coming and stuff, hence putting it on the cover because I try and stay honest on that sort of thing, obviously. But I got a lot of pushback from people saying, don't talk about it. Same as the 1022 magazines. Like I had people in the industry getting quite angry at me when I made the news post of they're banning 1022 mags in excess of 10 rounds because, I had information from people saying there's literally a CFO taking these things off of my shelf saying I can't sell them. So it was happening in real time, but people in the industry are saying, well, if you don't talk about it, maybe we'll still be able to get around it somehow.
Well, I sort of understand that because, being in industry, and I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I am in industry. I'm with Lever Arms Service in Vancouver, one of Canada's oldest brick and mortar gun shops. So I've experienced all of this. So I understand what you're saying. And I understand the attitude of industry that if we don't really make a lot of noise about this, maybe we can skate, close to the ice and avoid some of this. And that is the wrong attitude to take. And Canadian industry actors that I speak to, I always say, look, you can't do that anymore. What worked 40, 50, 60 years ago is not today. You have to be political. You have to stand up for your rights. The Canadian firearms industry is a legitimate industry. It is part of our culture. It's part of our history. It's part of our future. And if that industry does not stand up for its rights, and by doing so, the rights and freedoms of Canadians, yeah, it will be extinguished. I don't think by this government, but by some future government. So I think they have a role in this, and they need to stand up and fight back with the rest of us, gun advocacy groups, regular gun owners, political actors in this. They are a very, very important part of this. And I would like to see the Canadian firearms industry play a more pivotal role in firearms law reform in the future.
I agree. And I think, I'll say as a quick side note as well, as a shout out to some of the industry that I thought did a great job. That was John Hipwell with Wolverine selling guns that had not received an FRT, knowing that gun, the WK-180, should be non-restricted. He felt comfortable putting it on the market. I thought that was a great way to put advocacy into action in a very real way. That was the industry showing the regulators in this case that look like we are in compliance. We just don't need your nod to do this. And I thought that was awesome. But I also think the industry definitely should kind of bear some teeth and get a little bit frustrated. I think they are now because they're facing an existential crisis of well-being and health in a lot of ways because of the regulations that have gone on. But I also think the community is doing the same thing. And I'm kind of recognizing now, maybe in the last couple of years, that there's a reciprocity sort of situation, almost a yin and yang, where the community feels threatened. The community faces this existential crisis of in very real terms, people are realizing that their gun clubs are suffering because memberships are dropping, because handguns can't be bought, new RPALs are thinner on the ground. There's less reason to have a restricted, thus less reason to have a gun club membership in many cases. So the clubs are suffering. People are noticing that the casual shoots that they used to go to are fewer and farther between, or less attended. And they're responding to this threat by going, hey, you know, we got to push back. Like, we just can't keep giving up ground, or we're going to lose our gun club. We're going to lose the little foursome that I go shooting with, that kind of thing. And I think the industry is kind of responding to that in the same way. And it's one of those things where I would have said probably 10 years ago, and I don't know if it would have been correct or naive to say so, because obviously things change. I would have said 10 years ago the industry should have been leading the charge, because they have the biggest vested interest. They have the most access to legal information, the best access to lawyers, all these sorts of things, but they should have been the ones pushing government back.
That is not naive at all, and they should have been. But there's a certain attitude out there, and I am familiar with it. And industry has economic issues at stake here. Okay, I understand that.
And people should remember,
you're a company.
The industry, a lot of members of it do business with the government. Like,
Yes.
a lot of people used to ask me, like, well, why doesn't Colt Canada get involved in this whole AR-15 thing? Like, they're the biggest manufacturer of AR-15s in Canada. Well, because their biggest client is the people banning the guns. Like, they're not going to turn around and say, hey, government of Canada, you are the ones that buy most of our guns, but we're really angry with you. So we're going to do what? Like, what are they really going to do here?
Well, what they could do is they could support, and in Coal Canada, it's a company. They're there to make money. They're there to supply a product. But I think what Canadian industry has to do is support advocacy. Okay, and they don't do it sufficiently yet. Okay, they have done a little bit in the past, and I remember during long gun registry there was a little bit of that happening, because they saw the potential for that to extinguish firearms ownership in Canada. But current industry, and I know it's economics, you know, end of the day, it's the bottom dollar, and you do what you can do. I get that. That's fine. But what Canadian industry has to realize is they have to support firearms advocacy politically with firearms organizations in Canada, like NFA. You know, you don't feel comfortable, playing a lot of, politics, political action. You don't see that as your role. There are organizations in this country who will do that for you. I know there is an industry group, the CSAAA. If you're an NFA member, you know what NFA's stance on that is, especially in regards to the May 2020 OIC. But the fact of the matter is, if Canadian industry groups, more of them, supported firearms advocacy organizations, I think we would be further ahead. Okay, that's
Absolutely.
where it stands now.
And I think what you said too about firearms industry should support advocacy groups if they're not, I can't remember how you put it, but about not being comfortable stepping into that political limelight.
Yeah.
I think that describes a lot of people, but more importantly, I think that there is a position for gun owners to recognize, like, you should support advocacy, because not only if you're not comfortable with politics and stuff like that, but like, it's also not your job. Like, if you're running a gun shop, you've got enough stuff to do with taxes, regulation, staffing, inventory controls, all that stuff, that, like, advocating for your store on a political level is a great thing to do. Like, don't get me wrong, every gun shop owner should have a relationship with their MP, but that is also naive to say, because business owners are busy. And they should have advocates that they can turn to, who they can say, hey, yeah, you know what, you're the person who I'm going to give my support towards, because I think you're going to represent my interests on a grander scale than I can. And I think that's what organizations are designed to do, is be force multipliers, instead of having one every, like here in Kelowna, for example, there's like 3 gun shops. There's one conservative MP. We could have 3 people contacting the MP, and that'd be great. But it's better off if we have someone talking to people in Ottawa.
Exactly. And I think they do. Okay. And I think you put it there, I think you put it very succinctly there, force multiplier. Okay. I see a very high level of political activism among Canadian firearms owners, Canadian firearms businesses, and Canadian industry. But at this point in time, it's kind of unfocused. And frankly, I got to say it right now, The only way this is going to be corrected is by the election of a new government. Okay. Once we have a new government, we have the opportunity to correct all of this, everything that has happened since 2020 or even 2019. Okay. They are very open-minded on. I think they understand the failure of the Trudeau administration's firearms agenda. They know that it has been directed at the wrong people, and they are very open about correcting that. Just a general government business sort of thing. I think they have the same kind of ideological commitment to it that we have. Okay, so when that government is elected, if Canadian firearms owners, Canadian firearms industry can get on the same page, I think we can make the type of reforms that are necessary to make sure that in the future, and that day in the future when there's another liberal government and they come after us again, they're going to have a great number of political and legislative roadblocks to make sure they cannot do to us what they have done to us since 2020.
I agree, and I think that I agree with your comments on the unfocused nature. I think that I'd said previously in a few places, and it's not something that I've broached in a huge way because and it's not that I'm going to be negative about it, because I try not to be negative about gun efforts on organizations' behalfs and stuff. But I didn't cover, for example, a lot of the legal stuff that went on around the AR-15 ban, because my personal opinion was that the ban, the actions that this government has taken constitute, in my opinion, political issues for us, not legislative issues, not legal issues. They're not issues to be remedied by the court. They're issues that will be remedied at the ballot box, and it's the only way it would settle out.
Yes.
And I would have liked to have seen a more concerted, organized, and cohesive effort amongst our community to work on that election, because I think that Aaron O'Toole is a good example of someone who he was leading in the polls. There was an opportunity for us to have had him as the PM. Now, obviously, he made a huge mistake with his announcement that he would support a ban. But that mistake on his part is, I think, in some way a reflection of our community's failings, that he even thought that was a rational answer. It's pretty insane, especially given Fred Delorey's involvement was like a shocker to me. But I think that
shocker to you, it was a shocker to us as well.
I can imagine. So yeah, and I think, but that's where it's only a mistake if we don't learn from it. And I think that in this particular go around, I think that the gun community, both industry and individuals, should not take it for granted that Pierre Poilievre is going to win, and should not take it for granted that if he wins, we will get everything we want right away. I don't say that with any kind of foreboding. Obviously, the polling is showing a certain thing, but I just don't think that's wise. I think that was sort of the attitude around Aaron O'Toole's particular election. Was a lot of people thought, oh, he's coasting to a pretty decent margin. We're looking at probably a minority. Things will fix. You got to get involved. Like if you can join your advocacy groups, but on a real grassroots level, if you want to see political change, the best thing you could do is also get involved yourself, volunteer, reach out to your candidates, get involved in, like, people really totally underestimate the amount of involvement an individual on a local electoral district association can make, because then you're talking to the candidate, you're maybe taking them to the range before they're an MP, before their ego grows too big.
Look, Dan, you're absolutely right. And I can assure you that all across Canada today, people are doing that. And I'm glad you're saying this, because there's people watching this going, I've never heard this before. What can I do? And, for crying out loud, if you care about this issue, join the Conservative Party of Canada, join your local EDA. I've talked to so many people where I'm saying, exactly the same thing you just said. You want to be politically powerful, you can be. On this issue, you believe in the Canadian right and cultural tradition of firearms ownership, that's where you start. Get politically active. Right now, Conservative Party of Canada has the best policy and platform on firearms law reform going forward. That's where you start. You join your local Conservative Party. You get involved in the EDA. You make it known to them that I'm here for the gun issue, okay? And I'm going to be on you like, a pit bull on a poodle on that issue as we go forward here. And it goes up the line. That's happening now. Does more of that have to happen? Absolutely. And, this has been a reoccurring theme all the way down through the years. And, I have to say that I'm more pleased now to see this sort of thing happening than I've ever been in the past. I mean, we had a lot of that going on back during long gun registry to get that conservative government elected. But especially now with the type of political attacks that we've seen on the firearms community of Canada since the Trudeau government got elected, it's just really, really snowballed. And I've been really, really pleased to see people get involved. But it's got to be more. Okay.
And I hope that people, like, maybe because, thinking about who's watching this podcast, obviously people that are pretty invested in the firearms hobby community, etc. Not your once a week or once a month kind of shooter who maybe sights in the rifle for hunting season. And amongst those people that are watching this, I just like to say specifically to you people, there's that term that I'm not supposed to say, I suppose, or I'll get kicked off of Hockey Night in Canada. If you're watching this, you're probably one of those people who could consider themselves, and you may not, if you're listening to this, dear listener, you may not consider yourself an expert on firearms because you consume a lot of firearms media, and you would assume that the people that you are consuming media from are more expert than you. That may or may not be the case. However, to your local Conservative Party electoral district association, I can almost guarantee that you would present as an expert. And you should provide them with whatever expertise you can. Present yourselves to them, say, I'm here for the gun issue. I'm here to answer any questions you've got about the bans that were passed. Because a lot of the people that are coming into the Conservative Party now, some of them are motivated by policy. Like many of us in the gun community are obviously very policy centric. But there are also a lot of people who they've wanted to get into politics. They see a winning candidate. It's an opportunity to get into the House of Commons. They may not be invested in any issue, and most of them are probably not particularly invested in this issue. And I'm speaking specifically of people that are seeking candidacies. And if you start getting involved in these groups now, before the candidacies are decided, you could have a hand in swaying those candidates. And where it gets really interesting and exciting is, like Blair said, we have seen nothing but attacks. We have been losing ground since 2015, basically. And I would argue we made ground under Harper's majority. Very important, crucial ground, but it was a very small piece of it. Like losing the long gun registry is the reason we can keep a ton of these guns, but that's a small victory on the broader sense.
It was the first firearms law reform in modern Canadian political history.
Yes. And I think that people should get involved, and hopefully this might motivate some people, is that we're on the cusp of potentially we've faced the largest change in firearms regulation history from Marco Medicino and Bill Blair and those guys in the last few years. We're now staring down the barrel, no pun intended, of the most potentially positive firearms change legislatively in generations, because all of the push that the Liberals have done, and it's forced the Conservatives to take a stance on an issue that, to be quite honest, Stephen Harper had no interest in taking. He just wanted this whole issue to go away. He wasn't pro or anti-gun. He didn't really care. He just knew that this was a political hotbed issue. By forcing this issue to the fore, it's going to make the Conservatives confronted. I've said this before. I feel like Pierre Poilievre is going to rescind the buyback, for example, because you'll have no choice. Like, you can't just keep letting it go. He can't keep granting the amnesty because people will be dying and losing their handguns and their AR-15s.
I cannot see a Conservative government confiscating guns.
No. And so at worst case, he could extend the amnesty, but I don't even think that's likely, because as long as they do, they'll be burning millions of dollars, as we've seen the office of the superintendent of gun bans effectively doing so far. What is it? $47 million have been consumed with no guns bought back yet. They'll continue to do this. And it is just the long gun registry 2.0, because that's exactly, there's no endpoint on this. They'll never be able to say, job conclusively completed, so we can wrap this up. And I think that's what they'll have to address it. So if you get involved now, we have a better chance of moving that ball further downfield. And like Blair said, putting in some legislative buttresses. And also, too, if you're one of those people that, because I know there's lots of gun owners out there that simply cannot view themselves joining the Conservative Party for whatever number of reasons, and I'm certainly not going to judge anyone on that, there's going to come a reckoning after this, where all of those gun owners, and I don't mean to sound a bit aggressive in this, but, having endure the I'm a liberal gun owner and I'm going to vote for Justin Trudeau because I don't think he'll do anything bandwagon that existed in 2015 and kind of killed me. It's going to be time for those people to step up, because as I've said in other podcasts, Jagmeet Singh currently holds the linchpin of power essentially in Canada. he was elected by 40,000 people. That's a handful of gun clubs across this country. That is not a large number of people. And yet, in the NDP's eyes, that was a coronation. That was a groundswell of support like they'd never seen. There's going to be a day after this, after Pierre Poilievre hopefully wins the next election, where the NDP and Liberals boot out their leaders and they have their own elections. And those elections are going to be decided by a few thousand people. And if you're one of those gun owners that considers yourself a Liberal in NDP, we in the gun community are going to be relying on you to take the same role with those parties that we are currently taking with the Conservative Party to get ourselves recognized and get the goals realized that we want to realize.
That's exactly right, because I've dealt with this question many times down through the years. National Firearms Association has many members who are, NDP and Liberal members. And the question I always get from those people, and I get it all the time, why don't you go to our parties and say and explain to them the firearms issue? Why don't you go to them and just say, hey, look, you're on the wrong track. This is the reality on firearms in Canada, and that'll educate them, and that will steer them towards better firearms policy. And I'm going, what planet are you on? We're the gun lobby. They have written us off. You have more power as a NDP or Liberal member than I do as a representative of the gun lobby. Okay, you go to your party and you make these arguments, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant, because you're going to be running up against people that you have a lot in common with, politically, ideologically. But when you address this issue, you're going to get a lot of really negative blowback, but you're going to have to stand your ground. And that is the only way that this issue is going to change in Canada in the future. We'll provide you with all the support you need. We'll provide you with the data, the statistics, the argument, all that good stuff. But you got to do it. If you're an NDP member, if you are a Liberal member, it's up to you, because your party leaders are not going to listen. Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau, they're not going to listen to us. They've written us off as organizations.
So that being said, they don't want to be educated because it doesn't work for them politically. And one of my favorite Daniel Fritter moments, and we actually did a little bit of a video on this, I'm going to throw it up on the screen actually right now, is when Marco Mendicino had a press conference and you got in there. Now, we threw together a little bit of a video at the time. We dumbed it down a little bit just so that the average Joe that sees it, kind of understands what's going on. It's less than a minute, but I'm just going to throw this up here because it's fun.
Daniel Fritter from Calibre magazine.
Can you explain how the gun registry was assisting in that?
Well,
Okay, well that doesn't answer the question, but we'll move on. Fun fact, that was the last press conference that Marco Mendicino held where media was just allowed to call in. Every single one after one, that was either you had to attend in person in Ottawa or you had to be pre-screened. And I did attempt to get pre-screened and approved for them, but wouldn't you know it, didn't matter how early I applied for approval to attend, the reply would always come about 50 minutes after the press conference ended of, oh, sorry, we didn't see this earlier. We're all full anyways. Perfect. So that was how that ended. I mean, I will say I'm glad that that video has been so popular, because it was a pretty comical moment. I mean, when he first said that, the long gun registry was hugely beneficial in arresting the guy from the shooting that largely created the long gun registry, or is credited with creating it. It was kind of, I was messaging guys that I knew being like, did he actually just say that? Like, that's insane. I don't know if Dominic LeBlanc's any better, because he's been pretty quiet on the issue, but yeah. And I think that's where Blair's right, of these people, the Liberal Party and the NDP Party in its current form has no interest in talking to us. They have no interest in learning about this. But there will be candidates looking to lead that party who will hopefully, and this is to sound like the ever-present optimist, if you are one of those people that is an NDP or a Liberal member, you will face pushback because there's going to be some stalwarts within those parties that really just don't like guns and they never want to see those parties embrace firearms. But there will be a whole host of people that recognize the harm that has been done to both of those parties from the stance they've taken. And I think the Liberals might be more difficult because they've been pretty anti-gun for a long time. But the NDP, the harm that Jagmeet Singh has done to that party with the sort of identity politics and this culture war that he's kind of waging, I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to get involved with that party afterwards that might have a different opinion. And I would love it if we could kind of make this issue politically agnostic, because I think, batting it back and forth like a tennis ball here politically has been terrible for my blood pressure, frustrating for gun owners.
It can be if those Liberal and NDP members stand up, and I know they're there, and they don't like to do it because it's I'm a firearms owner. I know this is all BS. My party's policy is totally insane, but there's so many more important issues that I want to see go forward. You got to make a choice. Is this an important issue to you? Do you see this as a Canadian right and cultural tradition? Okay, if you do, it is your duty to stand up within your party of choice and make that argument. And like I said before, it's going to be really, really difficult. And I know members of those parties don't like to do that because they want to have, good relations with everybody and come to a common understanding and that sort of thing. But if they do not do that, we are going to continue to face what we are facing today and the future in regards to the firearms issue in Canada, our right, our culture. It's their duty, and you got to overcome this. You got to expect and be prepared for that blowback, but it's your right. And if you don't do this, eventually at some point in the future, we're all going to lose.
Yeah. So to that point though, when you're talking about that, and I'm just speaking as a Calgarian in Alberta, you have individuals like Rachel Notley, and even more recently, Naheed Nenshi there is the leader of the NDP in Alberta. And because Jagmeet Singh has been such an unmitigated disaster, they are now talking in Alberta about, well, we don't want to be part and parcel with the federal NDP anymore. And the NDP are one of those only parties that actually does follow suit with their federal party, right? Like, people don't realize Danielle Smith is not part of Pierre Poilievre's party. However, the NDP across Canada are supposedly part of Jagmeet Singh's party, right? So they're now talking about that in Alberta, saying he doesn't want to be part of the federal party here. Now, that's simply because it's been so bad, and that Jagmeet Singh has now got this horrible reputation. But Naheed Nenshi was a unmitigated disaster as well. People don't realize. I mean, it was one of those things where he kind of just got in during the floods in Calgary, and I know people that work for the city in emergency services that were along the lines of like, okay, he's on Twitter all the time and he shows up at the perfect opportunity and throws on a hard hat and nails one nail in, and then he's gone. And that's all you see on TV. So everybody thinks he's working so hard. But man, we've been out here all damn day. And Harper was there with his wife putting sandbags together. So it was a propaganda tactic, obviously, and it worked for him. And now he's going to be our provincial NDP leader, hoping to actually get provincial leader at some point. They will do whatever they think will put them in power and will give them that paycheck. And so if we do have individuals that are firearms savvy, I guess, in those positions, but I still don't support the NDP.
Yeah, I think I can speak to this because, and I think Dan will understand this too, being from BC. The provincial parties, the provincial NDP parties do differ from the federal party. Okay. And we've experienced this during the past. In BC, we had a provincial NDP party that did sign on to the long gun registry in the 1990s. It was that type of party. They thought, hey, it's a federal initiative. We'll sign on to it. We'll cooperate and we'll see where it goes. But later on, and specifically during the 2005-2006 federal election, and that was the Paul Martin handgun ban election. If I am elected, I will ban handguns in Canada. And during that time, the provincial NDP, who were not in power at that time, but the provincial NDP in British Columbia said, would you support this sort of thing if you were in government? And they said, no, it's crazy. We don't support this. You're targeting the wrong people. But that was the result of a common belief among British Columbians, whatever party they were a part of, the NDP, BC Liberals, whatever, saying this is crazy, this is politics. The people they are targeting are law-abiding, and this is their property. So we would not support that. So they did speak out against it at that time. So in a case like Alberta, where you have somebody like Nenshi, who is probably not in love with the idea of people owning firearms, that's up to Albertans to make the case that this is the third rail. If you go there, this can take you out. This can lessen or destroy your political opportunities here. This is part of our culture. This is our right. Do not sign on to a federal initiative against firearms. Do not undertake one in this province. And maybe your political fortunes will be a little sunnier.
Well, and we did do a thing in Alberta here when Rachel Notley was running against Danielle Smith. We pulled up some of the old quotes from Rachel Notley and we distributed them. You don't need 600 bullets to kill a moose. Things like that she was saying that were absolutely
the nonsense. Yeah.
And I actually went back and forth with one of the individuals, one of her door knockers that came here, who actually had a little bit of information about their policy on firearms. Yes, we want handguns banned and no one needs an assault style firearm and blah blah blah, and
what is that even?
Yeah, well, I was like, please tell me more. Wrote it all out. We posted it online, right? Here's your policy. Yep. Here's their policy. And we had individuals contacting us, and she's a good old Alberta cowgirl. Why, she wouldn't do this? Well, guess what? This is right from the horse's mouth. This is the policy here, and hopefully that did affect some.
Well, I think it did. But again, it's the culture of those parties. Okay. And I think, especially in the West, those parties understand that there's a gun culture here that they have to they have to understand, and they have to take a political accounting of. Okay. If we go against guns, we are going to lose votes. A lot of those voters are members of our party. Hey, blue collar union guys, one of the biggest per capita numbers of gun owners in Canada, right? And I think the federal Liberal and NDP parties are learning that now and are going to learn it in the next election. If this is you, if you feel this is your right and your cultural tradition, and you're a member of that party or a union, it is your duty to stand up for that, not only for yourself, but for the rest of us. Okay, because people in those parties have not done that in the past, and they have relied on, hey, you're a gun group, you have to go to our people and explain this issue to them, and then they'll understand it, and then they will lay off. No, they won't. This is an ideological issue now. They have embraced the ideology of civil disarmament. It's up to you as an NDP or Liberal member to reverse that. And you can do that, because after the next federal election, those parties are going to be in disarray. There's going to be leadership campaigns. Jagmeet Singh will be gone. Justin Trudeau will be gone. And if you want to remake the firearms policies of those parties, this is going to be the perfect opportunity. So stand up. We'll support you.
Well, and to your guys' point at the beginning there, when you were talking about hiding, firearms owners hiding, one thing that I think that was a major, major backfire for the Liberals and the NDP with all of these bans is that they've gotten people, including criminals, far more interested in firearms, right? And so we now have an entire, the culture is changing. As we were discussing before, the culture is changing. We have way more allies now. We have way more individuals contacting us that are not firearms owners or anything that want to know. They're like, well, what is this assault firearm ban? They're getting rid of these fully automatic blah blah blahs, and then we let them know, and they almost feel betrayed because they've been lied to.
The education that we're doing, NFA, Calibre magazine, it's really having a great effect. I mean, I put it down to the means of communicating information today are fantastic. So whenever they put out these narratives and bromides, they're very, very easily defeated, and we're getting very, very good at doing that. But politically speaking, if we're going to change the culture of the NDP and Liberal parties. I'm gonna put it that way right now, because that's what we have to do. Okay, we have to change the culture of the NDP and Liberal parties as it pertains to firearms, because those parties today, and I would say as it has developed in the last 20, 25 years, their policies are civil disarmament. Okay, they may, in their, perfect world, they may allow a certain amount of sustenance hunting, especially among Aboriginals. But as far as the culture as we understand it today, that will be extinguished.
Yeah, because I don't think anyone, can argue with the point of the policies that have been undertaken by the Liberals and the NDP as of recently have not been beneficial to Canadians at large. And I think if someone's struggling with the notion of potentially pushing those parties that they belong to further down the road towards, gun acceptance, it doesn't even, if we're looking at a reasonable expectation of the future and Pierre Poilievre potentially forming government, reforming a bunch of these gun laws, you don't need to go and tell the Liberals that they need to go even farther. You just kind of need to make the next leader of the Liberals well-informed enough that they don't want to push back. Put the pin back in the grenade, as it were, and say, okay, look, we're just going to get to the point. I've said this numerous times with normal media people, of it's not about having more or less gun control. That should not be the goal of any responsible Canadian. It should be about getting to the right amount of gun control, because none of us would accept a society where someone can walk out of a prison these days after serving about 3 days for some sort of violent battery crime and then being able to go and buy an M249 from the 7-Eleven. That wouldn't be acceptable. That is not a reasonable thing for society to embrace in. But so we all accept a certain degree of control. It's about finding the right amount, where the amount of money that we spend as taxpayers, because ultimately with our governments, this is another thing that people should be aware of, that is the only thing government has. The only power they have is the public purse. They can make laws, but newsflash, if they don't have the money to pay the police or the lawyers to enforce them, or the jails to put people into, the laws are useless. That is what Canada is now realizing. Yeah. They control the public purse. So we need to have gun control and gun policy that respects that fact and just goes, we're going to provide maximum value for public safety as a comprehensive, full-fledged notion. And gun control is simply one component of that, making sure that violent criminals cannot carry guns.
Dan, I understand where you're coming from on this, okay? And you use the word there, respect, okay? And that's very important, because any regulation or policy adopted on this has to respect the Canadian right and cultural tradition of firearms ownership. And that is what has been missing for the last 30 years in this country.
And I think so. This is one thing I was going to say about the Alberta thing, which I'll say, Alberta NDP there, by all means, change your name to Alberta United. It'll work out really well. Trust me. Just don't ask Kevin Falcon about that. There's something interesting that I think people might, I've been kind of batting this idea around for a long time, and I think people who have followed me for a while will know this, but I've been saying for years, because of the crime trends, crime is reaching generational high levels now, specifically violent crimes involving firearms, reaching high levels exceeding that of any statistics Canada's measured points in the history. I come from a background, before I got into automotive testing and stuff, actually what I went there to put myself through school to learn was partly forensic psychology, where I studied gun policy, specifically contrasting gun culture in the United States, for example, versus gun control regimes like Canada. So I have a tremendous amount of respect, for example, for concealed carry, because in the states where concealed carry was passed, it has created reductions in crime rates. But obviously, there's some context required where the crime rates are higher. So it has an effect on areas with higher crime rates. As Canada's crime rate climbs, and as we don't have the public purse to afford additional police officers, for example, Canada has one of the lowest rates of law enforcement officers per capita in the G7/developed world at large. So we don't have the enforcement officers. We do not have the penitentiary room. We do not have the courts willing to do the charges. We don't have the people to process the volume of crime going on, basically, in Canada, to put it tersely. Nor do we have the tax base willing to increase funding to a level that would allow us to address that through punitive measures. You start to ask, well, what are the options that are going to be available? Well, Pierre Poilievre, let's say he wins in 2025, or God forbid, early 2026, because technically they could push the election that far. He rolls back the handgun ban. Danielle Smith has, and he rolls back C21. One of the components of C21 is moving the authorization to carry permit into federal jurisdiction. If he rolls back C21, then that returns to provincial CFO jurisdiction. So that would be Alberta's CFO, who is quite pro-gun, has a collection of Nambus and Japanese firearms. It is awesome. If crime continues to rise, for example, in areas in like Edmonton, where gun crime went up 109% in the last couple of years, and let's say it continues to rise because even with Pierre Poilievre in power, we simply don't have the judicial system capacity to address this. What options are available to, for example, Danielle Smith going into the next provincial election, besides saying, hey, you know what, you should be able to apply for an authorization to carry 3, permit to carry for the protection of life, and you should be able to get that. Maybe she puts conditions on it. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she just says, yeah, you know what, Terry Bryant, you approve these when they come in. And then she just goes to Naheed Nenshi and goes, well, you take this away from people. I think that's going to be, I think, it sounds ridiculous because a lot of people are going to go, that's never going to happen.
No.
People have said handguns and never get banned. So, you know.
Up to 1969, that was the situation in Canada. Concealed handgun licenses were handled by local law enforcement. In 1969, under legislation, it was federalized. The RCMP would decide who would be issued concealed handgun licenses based on a number of criteria. I think you're kind of on the right track here, okay? And looking forward to a Poilievre government. I kind of see, based on the negotiations that we've had with conservative actors, I think there would be a lot more time certainly spent on looking at ways this could be devolved down to the provinces based on their individual criteria. Okay. Why are we doing this? Why is it federalized? Well, we know why the Liberals federalized it. Is this our agenda? No, it's not our agenda. The provinces are certainly demanding more authority, more purview over firearms laws. Why don't we write a Firearms Act to facilitate that? Okay. And I know Alberta, Saskatchewan, a number of provinces will be making that argument to the feds when that time comes. There's a great number of issues that would be included in that. But for people who have a legitimate need, and that used to be recognized in Canada, okay? And it still exists, even more so today. I mean, we've had this narrative over the last 50 years where, hey, you know what, Canada's a peaceful country. We don't have the levels of crime they have in the United States. We don't need that here. We need tighter controls, and it should be done by the federal government. That narrative is falling apart today. So as we go forward into a new legislative era, certainly on the part of the National Firearms Association, those are the type of issues that we are going to address. And we need the support of everybody who is concerned about these issues in a more streamlined manner than it is today, in a more non-political and real-world manner than those authorizations are granted today. That's where everybody's going to have to be on deck.
Well, where things get interesting too is for the ATC3 protection of life permit, the 3 criteria, and I'm going to mildly paraphrase here, but there's some key points. The 3 criteria are pretty simple. The first one is that the applicant or someone else must face an imminent threat to their life effectively. The second criteria is that the police can't protect you. And the third is that a handgun is the best system by which you can get protected. I want to draw people's attention to this because A, it says you or someone else, which becomes, in the case of potentially someone, a provincial politician looking to create a competitive advantage for their next election campaign, that begins to look a lot like, well, can you guarantee that every single person in this province isn't facing imminent threat? Well, that's difficult. And none of this has been judicially tested either. So there's no Supreme Court hearing or there's no case law that they can refer to and go, well, here's what that term actually means. Also,
there it is.
People, there's no and in between those 3 clauses. It doesn't say that you need to face an imminent threat and the police can't protect you and a handgun's the best way. It just has those 3 criteria. They're separated by semicolons. So it'd be quite interesting to see what a provincial AG made of this. I'm quite intrigued to see where this goes eventually, because like I said, I don't know what other solutions are going to present themselves. And this problem is going to present first as a provincial problem. It's obviously being presented nationally on a federal level with Statistics Canada reporting on this stuff, but policing budgets are provincial. A lot of the crime is felt in provincial elections, most likely, because it's a lot of regional issues. So there are going to be provincial politicians that start to, they may not be looking for concealed carry as a solution, but they're going to be looking for some kind of solution to the increase in crime that they're seeing. And they're going to be, frankly, unless something changes drastically with regards to how we prevent crime in this country, they're going to get pretty desperate pretty quickly, because the rates at which we're seeing these crimes increase are simply untenable.
Yeah, I know you're right, but at this point in time, it's based on ideology. Okay.
Yes.
Where they're not looking at ways to enhance public safety. There are a lot of people in this country, a lot of political people in this country who have a lot invested in the idea that Canadians don't have guns, they don't need guns, they don't carry guns, we have a safe society. That may be challenged now.
But every day,
But there are
every day, I am seeing more comments from people, even as far as like letters to the editor in mainstream mass market, like major market newspapers.
I
Of
agree.
people saying, I think we should look at maybe potentially starting to carry guns, which if you
I
told me
agree.
10 years ago was going to be something I'd read in the paper, I would have said there's no way. Because like
No,
you,
it's
ideology,
been
but it is shifting. Like it's moving
no,
already.
yes, you're right, and it's been pretty consistent over the years. But right now, we have political parties who have a lot invested in the idea of civil disarmament or a severe limitation on the ability to own firearms in Canada. And until those cultures change, and I think they are changing. Okay, certainly with Conservative Party, our discussions with conservative politicians, actors, MPs certainly indicate that. Yes, a lot of education has been done over the years. But when you get into the case of provincial politics, and it's going to vary right across the country, right? Alberta is not going to look like Quebec, right?
Well, Quebec, you just had to pay the Quebec, who was it, the Solicitor General in Quebec that was taking bribes for ATCs like in 2005 or so.
Oh, really? You got some evidence of that, Dan?
Wow, I don't think I've got actually, I could probably find the news. I think he actually resigned over it. It was something like $10,000. He'd write a recommendation or something.
Well, the current government of Quebec assures you that that is not occurring now.
Of course not. There is no corruption in Quebec. Never has been, obviously, the case.
Never. No. It is the premier province in Canada, and we should all learn by their example.
Indeed.
But anyways, except when it comes to firearms, my God, those poor guys in Quebec right now in regards to firearms, I get those calls every day. And when you're talking about things like C21, the effects of C21 that we are feeling in the rest of Canada, times 10 in Quebec.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to look to where this ultimately goes, if you're in BC, Alberta, Ontario, down east somewhere, and you want to see where the federal policy wants this to go, it is happening right now in Quebec. And everybody needs to sit up and take notice of that. I think people are. But the key is when there is a new government and the type of Firearms Act that they will have to introduce, and it will have to be fundamental firearms law reform. I think they understand now that you can't just patch this over. You can't make little nips and tucks here like the Harper government did. It has to be an entirely new Firearms Act. And when that happens, it's going to be up to all of us, the firearms advocacy organizations, guys like you, Dan, with Calibre magazine and your devotion to the Canadian right and cultural tradition of firearms ownership, everybody on this, to make sure that they understand the basic fundamental issues that have brought us to this point where we are actually facing a totally dysfunctional system that targets the wrong people and wants to confiscate property.
Excellent points, Daniel. We could talk to you all night. We got to get you on here again because there's like so many different things I want to talk to you about. Mental health, because I saw you make some really, really amazing points on ballistically speaking about mental health. Also wanted to get in where this money is going with this boondoggle that's unfolding before our eyes right now. So we've got to have you on again here very, very soon.
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell us where we can find you, your website, all of your social media handles?
My website is www.calibremag.ca, spelled the Canadian way, CALIBREMAG.ca. The Americans call it Calibre, which is always entertaining when I go to the US trade shows. Instagram is Calibre Mag. Twitter is Calibre Mag. YouTube is, I believe, the same, actually. But if you just search Calibre Magazine, there is us. and a watch magazine. So we're one of the easier ones to find. I appreciate all the support from all the subscribers, obviously, and all the people that have advertised over these 12 years. It's been awesome, and I look forward to hopefully many, many more.
Any quick closing thoughts?
Better times ahead. Better times ahead.
Yeah. And to hold the conservatives' feet to the fire, I think, is really important.
Indeed.
And that's the
absolutely. And we have some real opportunities here that we didn't even have under the Harper government.
Daniel will have you on again here real soon. Thanks a lot. Have a good night, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of NFA Talk. Like and follow the NFA on social media and sign up to become a member.